When you first start learning a new skill, say, I don't know, painting, it feels incredibly structured.
Oh, absolutely.
It's essentially, well, painting by numbers.
Yeah.
You rely on this very rigid framework. You stay meticulously inside the lines. You match the designated color to the corresponding number. And at the end of the process, you have a recognizable, if somewhat, generic picture.
Right, because the parameters of success are unambiguously defined for you.
Exactly.
Huh.
It's comforting because the boundaries are explicit.
You either use the correct color in the correct space or you didn't.
Yeah.
There's very little room for interpretation, which honestly provides a massive psychological safety net for a beginner.
Right. But then as you progress, you step into the realm of true artistry, and suddenly someone just snatches away that numbered guide. They hand you a blank canvas, a bewildering array of mixed pigments, and simply tell you to create. You're no longer just reproducing a predetermined image, You are interpreting the world. The rigid lines vanish, and you're left navigating a landscape that is entirely subjective and, frankly, profoundly murky.
Well, you're moving from mere mechanical replication to genuine expression. And in that transition, the safety net disappears completely. You have to rely entirely on your own internalized understanding of color theory, composition, and light.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are throwing away the paint by numbers kit. If you've been following our 6-part English learning challenge, we've been scaling this massive mountain of language acquisition, moving from the foundational building blocks of A1 right through the conversational fluency of B2.
Which is an achievement in itself, but
But today, we're crossing a monumental threshold. We're decoding the C1 level, which is the point where you stop merely studying a language and you start actively living it.
it is arguably the most fascinating juncture in language acquisition. I mean, it's the exact moment a language ceases to be an external subject you analyze, and instead it becomes an intrinsic, almost invisible operating system for how you process the world.
Right. And our mission today is to unpack exactly what it means to be a C1 user. We're exploring the cognitive rewiring, the cultural fluency, and the massive professional metamorphoses that occur at this formidable stage.
And we have a phenomenal stack of sources to back this up.
We really do. We have the official Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR definitions, which were dissected by the linguists at MyLinguistics. We're examining a paper on cognitive development from the European Science Publishing Journal, tearing into an advanced C1 C2 course syllabus from Mobility Friends, and looking at a mixed methods research study from the journal Computer Fraud and Security.
Which quantifies exactly how this level of proficiency dictates your career status and salary. It's a fascinating cross-section of research because it highlights that language mastery is not, isolated to linguistics.
Yeah.
Reaching C1 intersects with neuroscience, advanced pedagogy, cultural anthropology, and organizational behavior.
Now, before we plunge into the mechanics of this, we need to establish a ground rule for this specific conversation.
Yes, this is crucial.
Because we are dedicating this time entirely to the C1 advanced level, we are going to honor that focus by conducting our entire discussion today using sophisticated, nuanced C1 level English.
Right.
We want this deep dive to serve a dual purpose, essentially. An analysis of the proficiency level, but also an immersive, practical listening exercise for you, the listener, to calibrate your own ear to this standard.
It's honestly the most effective way to demonstrate the concepts we're about to discuss. We'll be deploying the very idioms, complex sentence structures, and nuanced vocabulary that define the C1 threshold.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by defining our baseline. What exactly constitutes this threshold? According to the CEFR guidelines detailed in our MyLinguistics source, a C1 user can understand a wide range of demanding, longer texts.
And we are talking about contemporary literary prose, highly specialized technical articles, complex opinion pieces, that sort of thing.
Right. But the defining characteristic, the real differentiator from the B2 level, is their ability to recognize what the framework calls implicit meaning.
That phrase, implicit meaning that, is the crux of advanced fluency.
Why is that so pivotal?
Well, at the B2 level, which we typically call upper intermediate, you are highly functional. You can survive a business meeting, you can navigate a complex travel itinerary, and you can comfortably express your opinions on familiar topics.
You're getting the job done.
Exactly. However, the communication remains largely literal. You're processing the surface-level transaction of words. At C1, you are doing something much more sophisticated. You're reading between the lines.
What does that look like in practice? Because, reading between the lines sounds a bit abstract.
Let's consider a typical corporate environment. Imagine a British manager reviewing a proposal and saying to their team, I suppose we could look at it from that angle, although it's certainly a brave choice.
Okay.
Now, a B2 learner processes the literal vocabulary. They hear brave choice, and they might actually interpret that as a compliment. They think the manager is praising their innovation.
Because brave is traditionally a positive adjective.
Right, exactly. But a C1 learner immediately detects the implicit meaning. They register the subtle micropause, the specific downward inflection, and, crucially, the cultural context of British understatement.
So they understand instantly that brave choice is actually a devastating critique.
Utterly devastating. The manager is essentially saying, that is a terrible idea and it carries enormous risk. The C1 learner understands the unstated assumption that colors the entire interaction. They are detecting irony, sarcasm, and cultural undertones that are completely absent from the literal transcript of the conversation.
They understand why the speaker chose to phrase it that way, in that specific moment, and, I guess, crucially, what they deliberately left unsaid.
Precisely.
Furthermore, the CEFR notes that C1 users can express ideas fluently and spontaneously without any obvious searching for expressions. They aren't buffering, essentially. They use language flexibly across social, academic, and professional spectrums. But achieving that lack of buffering, that requires a staggering time commitment.
Oh, it's monumental.
Our sources know that moving from A2 to B1 might take, 50 to 70 hours of structured study? B1 to B2 might take another 100 to 150 hours.
Yeah.
But moving into the C1 echelon, the math completely changes.
The linearity of classroom hours breaks down completely at this stage. You cannot reach C1 by simply sitting in a classroom for another 200 hours doing, fill-in-the-blank grammar exercise.
Right, that just won't cut it.
Reaching this level demands sustained daily immersion. It requires integrating the language inextricably into your daily life. Your work, your academic pursuits, your media consumption. You have to force yourself into environments where you are processing the language dynamically under pressure, rather than statically from a textbook.
I think about it like driving. Being a strong B2 learner is like driving an automatic car on a perfectly clear day along a familiar, well-paved road. You know the route, you're confident in the mechanics of steering and braking, and you reach your destination safely. You are a competent driver.
I like that analogy.
But functioning at C1, that is akin to driving a manual transmission car through a sudden torrential downpour in a convoluted foreign city with aggressive traffic, all while engaging in a profound, highly abstract philosophical debate with the passenger sitting next to you.
That is a wildly accurate representation of the cognitive load. To survive that drive, the actual mechanics of operating the vehicle, the clutching, the gear shifting, the spatial awareness, they must be entirely relegated to your subconscious.
Because you just don't have the bandwidth.
Exactly. You cannot afford the mental bandwidth to actively think about how to shift into third gear when you are simultaneously navigating a storm and debating existentialism. In language terms, the grammatical mechanics and the vocabulary retrieval must become subconscious, so your conscious mind can focus entirely on high-level persuasion and cultural navigation.
But that brings up an interesting tension in the source material, I think. If the mechanics are completely subconscious, and you're operating at this highly fluid, spontaneous level, does that imply you are infallible? Because I think a lot of learners assume that reaching C1 or C2 means you never make a mistake again. You achieve this state of linguistic perfection.
It's a pervasive myth, and honestly, the My Linguistics source goes out of its way to dismantle it. The framework explicitly states that C1 is not about achieving absolute robotic flawlessness.
Right.
In fact, if we look closely at native speakers, people who were born and raised in the language, who've spoken it their entire lives, a significant portion of them actually fall firmly into the C1 range rather than the elusive C2 mastery level.
Wait, really? Native speakers might not be C2. That seems totally counterintuitive.
It does, but the source provides a fantastic thought experiment to illustrate this. Imagine a brilliant university student who's majoring in Renaissance history. This student can effortlessly read dense, archaic texts about 16th century European politics, formulate highly sophisticated, nuanced arguments, and debate effortlessly in an academic seminar.
So they're clearly operating at a very high level.
Yet, hand that exact same native-speaking history student a complex, highly specialized academic journal article on, say, quantum mechanics or advanced organic chemistry.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they wouldn't just struggle. They'd likely be completely lost.
Exactly.
They might not understand the structural conventions of that specific scientific discourse, let alone the specialized lexicon.
Precisely. They might stumble over the syntax of a highly technical manual or fail to grasp the implicit meaning in a complex legal contract. This demonstrates that C1 proficiency is highly context dependent. It's about demonstrating robust adaptability and resilience in the face of linguistic ambiguity.
So a C1 user will still encounter words they don't know.
All the time, and they might occasionally make a grammatical error when tired or stressed, but they possess the strategic competence to circumlocute, to talk around the missing word and keep the communication flowing seamlessly.
That is incredibly liberating for a learner to hear, I think. The goal isn't infallibility. The goal is adaptability and resilience. And speaking of adaptability, this brings us to the underlying physiological changes that make this possible.
This is where it gets really interesting.
What is actually happening inside the brain to facilitate this subconscious processing? We have a fascinating paper here from the European Journal of Pedagogical Initiatives and Educational Practices, published by European Science Publishing.
Yes, a phenomenal study.
It argues that pushing your language proficiency to these advanced tiers doesn't just add more vocabulary to your mental dictionary. It fundamentally, physically alters your cognitive development.
It is a physiological transformation. The linguistic studies highlighted in the paper demonstrate that the rigorous demands of advanced language acquisition enhance something called metalinguistic awareness.
Metalinguistic awareness. Let's unpack that term because it sounds like, well, dense academic jargon.
It does sound intimidating. Essentially, it's the sophisticated ability to step back and think about language itself as an architectural system.
Okay.
Lower-level learners use words purely instrumentally. They want a coffee, so they string together the words to get a coffee. But a C1 learner develops an intuitive noticing of grammar, syntax, and morphology.
They start to recognize structural patterns and anomalies instinctively without needing to reference a textbook rule.
Right. They can feel when a sentence is structurally unbalanced, even if they can't immediately articulate the exact grammatical rule they are violating.
It makes me think of a highly trained jazz musician.
Oh, I love that comparison.
A casual listener hears a song on the radio and simply thinks, oh, that's a nice catchy melody. They consume the final product. But a maestro doesn't just hear the melody. The moment the music plays, their brain automatically dissects the underlying chord progressions.
They're hearing the math.
Right. They recognize the subtle syncopation and the time signature. They feel the tension and the resolution in the harmony. They're intimately aware of the system that generates the art. That is metalinguistic awareness applied to sound.
And just like that jazz maestro, a C1 learner doesn't have to pause the song to calculate the math behind the music. It happens instantaneously.
Right.
The European Science Publishing article elaborates on the neurological mechanics behind this. When you're juggling two complex linguistic systems simultaneously, especially at a high level, where you are actively suppressing your native language to operate fluently in the target language, you are engaging in a relentless form of cognitive resistance training.
The brain is actively managing this competition between the two languages.
Yes, both languages are constantly active in the brain. The executive control system, which is located primarily in the prefrontal cortex, has to work overtime to inhibit the non-target language so you don't accidentally speak French in the middle of an English business meeting.
That sounds exhausting.
It is initially. This constant high-speed processing, storing, retrieving, and analyzing of complex linguistic data physically strengthens neural pathways. It actually increases the density of gray matter in certain areas of the brain. The result of this neurological workout is the development of profound cognitive flexibility.
The paper defines cognitive flexibility as the ability to switch rapidly between disparate ideas, to search efficiently for equivalent expressions when you hit a roadblock, and to interpret meaning dynamically based on rapidly shifting contexts.
And the critical point is that this flexibility bleeds over into non-linguistic domains.
Really? How so?
The research indicates that individuals who have pushed their brains to accommodate a C1 language level often excel in tasks requiring intense, focused attention. They were superior at multitasking because their brains are already accustomed to managing competing information streams.
That makes total sense.
They are highly adept at filtering out irrelevant distractions, and they demonstrate enhanced problem-solving and creative thinking capabilities across all areas of their professional and personal lives.
But wait, is that actually a chicken and egg scenario?
How do you mean?
Well, are we certain that the grueling process of language learning causes this cognitive flexibility? Or is it simply a matter of self-selection? Perhaps individuals who naturally possess high cognitive flexibility and inherent problem-solving prowess are simply the ones who have the stamina to survive the journey to C1, while everyone else drops out at B2.
It's a very fair, skeptical question, and honestly, it's a debate that has occupied neurolinguists for decades. However, the prevailing consensus, which is supported by longitudinal studies referenced in the broader literature, is that while natural aptitude certainly provides a head start, the act of learning itself is the definitive catalyst.
So they've tested this.
Yes, researchers have taken individuals with baseline intensive language programs.
And their cognitive agility improved measurably.
Measurably and significantly. The sustained, intense cognitive load required to navigate advanced language simply forces the brain to create new synaptic connections. It's neuroplasticity in action. So regardless of your starting point, the marathon of reaching C1 unequivocally fortifies those neural networks.
So if the brain is this high-performance engine, the language learning process is the interval training that builds the horsepower, what exactly is the fuel? Because you can't just keep feeding a high-performance engine the same low-octane fuel you used when it was a beginner's model.
This is precisely where the vast majority of intermediate learners plateau.
Yeah.
They reach a strong B2, they feel competent, and then they continue using the exact same highly scaffolded, sanitized resources they've used for the past 3 years.
They stick to the standardized textbooks, the perfectly enunciated listening exercises recorded in soundproof studios, and the carefully curated grammar drills.
Which is comfortable, but detrimental for growth.
But according to an insightful article from ELT News, to breach the C1 threshold, learners must decisively abandon those safety nets. They have to immerse themselves in authentic materials. We're talking about raw content generated specifically by native speakers for native speakers, with zero pedagogical concession for learners.
None. We're talking about reading dense, unedited opinion editorials from major broadsheets, binge-watching contemporary, gritty television series without relying on subtitles.
This sounds terrifying.
It is. But it's also dissecting the rapid-fire lyrics of popular music, analyzing the rhetorical strategies in political debates, and even deciphering the colloquial, grammatically chaotic landscape of social media feeds.
The ELT News article lists several compelling benefits to this radical shift. The most immediate is that it drastically improves learner motivation by directly tying language acquisition to genuine personal interests.
Right. If you love finance, you read the Financial Times.
If you love cinema, you watch indie film critiques. But beyond motivation, it provides unfiltered exposure to the reality of the language. Textbooks sanitize language. Authentic materials expose you to idiomatic expressions, highly informal slang, overlapping dialogue, and a dizzying array of regional accents.
And this ties directly into our source from Interlingua Formation, which emphasizes the inextricable link between language and culture.
Right.
You simply cannot master a language without simultaneously decoding the culture that birthed it. Culture dictates the norms of communication. It influences how specific vocabulary is wielded, what topics are considered taboo, and the broader social and historical context that imbue words with their actual weight.
At the C1 level, you are no longer translating isolated vocabulary words. You are translating entire cultural contexts. Let's look at a practical example of this.
Okay.
You could memorize a list of 500 advanced C1 level vocabulary words. You could know the dictionary definition of every single one. But if you lack the cultural fluency to understand when and how to deploy them, it is entirely useless.
Oh, absolutely.
It's akin to spending 5 years mastering flawless Michelin-starred knife skills. You can julienne a carrot with your eyes closed, but never actually bothering to taste the soup you're cooking. You have the mechanical dexterity, but you are completely oblivious to the flavor, the balance, and the final experience of the dish.
I love that. And without that flavor profile, you are guaranteed to commit severe pragmatic errors. You might use a highly formal, archaic word in a casual pub setting, sounding unintentionally pompous or robotic.
Right.
Or, conversely, you might drop a piece of aggressive street slang into a formal boardroom presentation, appearing hopelessly unprofessional and completely misreading the room. This is where dialect awareness and the nuanced ability to fluidly adjust your linguistic register become paramount.
But let me look at this from the perspective of an overwhelmed learner.
Sure.
If I am an upper intermediate student, and I take your advice, I throw away my textbook, and dive headfirst into a fast-paced, slang-filled medical drama where the actors are mumbling behind surgical masks and regional dialects, isn't that just a recipe for profound discouragement?
It can be, yes.
How is a learner supposed to navigate that sheer, unadulterated chaos without drowning in cognitive overload.
Well, the cognitive overload is a very real threat, which is why the transition into authentic materials must be strategic. The ELT News article outlines specific pedagogical scaffolding to mitigate this. You don't just throw a learner into the deep end without a life vest.
Right.
Teachers, or self-directed learners, must meticulously select materials that strike a delicate balance. The content must be culturally rich and challenging, but not so esoteric or jargon-heavy that it becomes impenetrable.
So you wouldn't start with a dense legal thriller filled with obscure courtroom terminology.
Precisely, you build up to that. Furthermore, the article heavily advocates for pre-teaching vocabulary and conceptual frameworks.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, before you watch that gritty crime drama, you spend 20 minutes familiarizing yourself with the specific police jargon or the regional slang prevalent in that specific setting. You establish the context before you hit play. You're setting the stage before opening the curtain.
Ah, so it provides the brain with a few anchor points to hold on to while the chaos washes over them.
Exactly. The Interlingo source also champions the efficacy of intensive, full immersion language courses for this exact stage of learning.
Because they curate the chaos.
Exactly. These programs are brilliant because they create a controlled yet authentic environment. Learners are constantly bombarded with cultural and linguistic input, but they have expert facilitators present to help them untangle the colloquial knots in real time. It sustains their motivation through the inevitable frustration of the transition.
It's guided immersion. Okay, so we've established the mental rewiring required, and we have identified the authentic cultural fuel needed to power it. Now, I want to get very granular.
Let's do it.
Let's look under the hood and examine the specific mechanical tools a C1 user possesses. We are incredibly fortunate to have access to the actual course syllabus from the Mobility Friends Training Center for their Advanced English C1, C2 level course. This document is fascinating because it lays out the exact architecture of high-level proficiency.
Examining a syllabus of this caliber is highly illuminating. It takes all the abstract, cognitive, and cultural concepts we've been discussing and operationalizes them into concrete, trainable competencies. It shows us exactly what a C1 learner is practicing on a Tuesday morning.
Let's walk through these modules. Module 1 is titled Complex Communication and Debates. The objectives include expressing complex ideas clearly, engaging in highly structured debates, utilizing advanced collocations, and notably, it focuses heavily on hedging and softening opinions.
Hedging is perhaps the absolute hallmark of a sophisticated C1 user, particularly in cross-cultural communication.
Why is hedging so critical?
Well, lower-level learners, primarily due to their limited linguistic repertoire, often default to blunt, overly direct statements. If a B1 learner disagrees with a colleague's proposal, they might simply say, "You are wrong," or "That is a bad idea."
Because they literally only possess the vocabulary for binary agreement or disagreement. They lack the linguistic padding.
And in many English-speaking corporate cultures, particularly in the UK or parts of North America, that kind of bluntness can inadvertently come across as aggressive, combative, or tactless. It creates unnecessary friction.
Right.
A C1 learner, however, possesses what linguists call pragmatic competence. They have the tools to navigate delicate interpersonal dynamics. They use hedging devices to soften the blow.
What does it sound like in a boardroom? Give me a concrete example.
Instead of saying, "You are wrong," a C1 user might say, "I see where you're coming from, but I wonder if we might consider an alternative perspective." Or, "There seems to be a slight discrepancy in the data, which might suggest a different conclusion."
It's so much more diplomatic.
It is. They use modal verbs, introductory phrases, and conditional clauses. They possess the nuanced vocabulary to disagree vehemently, to entirely dismantle a colleague's argument, while remaining impeccably polite, diplomatic, and collaborative. It's the mastery of knowing not just what to say, but how to say it, when to say it, and to whom.
It's the linguistic equivalent of a velvet glove over an iron fist. Moving through the syllabus, Modules 2 and 6 focus intensely on academic and professional English. We see objectives like adapting language register, which we touched on regarding authentic materials, report writing, cross-cultural communication strategies, and advanced presentation skills.
So standard advanced fare.
Right. Module 3 dives into argumentation and persuasion, emphasizing logical construction and the ability to detect logical fallacies. Module 5 tackles advanced listening, demanding comprehension of fast-paced, authentic lectures and unscripted podcasts.
And all of these modules perfectly align with our previous discussions on cognitive flexibility and cultural immersion. They're designed to forge a learner who is formidable in a professional or academic arena.
But here is a detail that genuinely surprised me. Nestled right in the middle of this rigorous, professionally oriented, corporate-friendly syllabus is Module 4, titled Creative and Literary Language.
Oh.
The curriculum explicitly mandates the reading and interpretation of literary texts, the analysis of tone, style, and narrative voice, and a deep dive into figurative language and cultural references.
You find the inclusion of literature surprising in an advanced syllabus.
Frankly, yes. I mean, if I'm a mid-level logistics executive taking this course to enhance my English so I can negotiate international supply chain contracts, why on earth do I need to spend my time dissecting contemporary poetry or analyzing the narrative perspective in a fictional short story?
I hear that all the time.
Why is literary appreciation considered a mandatory functional component of a C1 toolkit tailored for the real world? It seems like an academic luxury rather than a professional necessity.
It's a common objection, but the premise that literature and business are entirely separate, non-overlapping domains is fundamentally flawed.
How so?
Business, politics, economics, and even basic daily social interactions are not conducted in sterile, literal, transactional terms. Human communication is almost entirely constructed upon a foundation of metaphors, idioms, and shared cultural narratives.
Okay, I need to see how that connects. Give me an example of how a poem helps a logistics manager.
Consider a high-stakes corporate negotiation. Tensions are high, and a senior executive leans forward and says, look, we need to nip this problem in the bud before it snowballs, otherwise we're all going to be left holding the bag.
Right.
That single sentence, which is a very common type of utterance in a boardroom, relies on a botanical metaphor regarding pruning, a meteorological metaphor about avalanches, and an idiom rooted in the history of petty theft and being caught with stolen goods.
And none of those words mean their literal dictionary definition in this context.
Exactly. If that logistics manager has only studied literal transactional business English, if they have actively eschewed the study of figurative language, they will hear those words, they will understand the individual definitions of bud, snowball, and bag, and they will have absolutely zero comprehension of the actual strategic intent being communicated.
They'll be sitting there wondering why the executive is suddenly talking about gardening and winter sports.
Precisely. They will be functionally literate, but culturally and strategically deaf. Module 4 is not about turning business executives into poets.
Right.
It's about equipping them with the analytical tools required to decode the heavy subtext of human interaction. If you don't understand how tone, voice, and figurative language operate in a piece of fiction, you will invariably miss the implicit meanings, the subtle power dynamics, and the cultural references embedded in a corporate merger negotiation or a casual high-stakes networking event. Metaphor is the operating system of native-level discourse.
That completely flips the script on how we view the humanities and language learning. The figurative language isn't just decoration, it is the actual structural load-bearing pillar of the conversation.
Exactly.
So we have built the cognitive engine, we've fueled it with authentic culture, and we have equipped it with this elaborate C1 toolkit of hedging, register adaptation, and metaphorical decoding. Now let's talk about the destination.
The ROI.
Yes, why go through this incredibly arduous, years-long process? What is the tangible, real-world payoff? This brings us to the career dividend, the hard return on investment of C1 proficiency.
And this is where the interdisciplinary nature of our sources truly shines. We are pivoting from neurolinguistics and pedagogy straight into organizational behavior and labor economics.
That's a fascinating pivot.
We're drawing upon a phenomenal mixed methods research study published in the Computer Fraud and Security Journal, authored by researchers Wen and Cao.
The data in this study is staggering, and I want to spend some time breaking down their methodology because it lends incredible weight to their findings. They didn't just ask a few people if they felt more confident.
No, this was rigorous.
They analyzed quantitative survey data from 500 professionals across various sectors, and they paired that with in-depth qualitative interviews. They tracked hard, verifiable career trajectories based on official CEFR levels over a 5-year period.
It is a highly robust data set. Let's examine the metrics regarding upward mobility. What happens to a professional's career trajectory when they cross that C1 threshold?
The disparity is profound. According to their data, professionals operating at a foundational A1 level experience a promotion rate of a mere 10% over a 5-year period.
Which is quite low.
However, professionals who have achieved C1 or C2 proficiency boast a promotion rate of 40% to 46% over that exact same time frame. They are advancing up the corporate ladder 4 times faster than their foundational counterparts.
And as one would expect, the financial remuneration mirrors that rapid mobility.
It doesn't just mirror it, it magnifies it exponentially. The study tracked average annual salary increases. An A1 learner might see a nominal 3% annual bump, essentially just keeping pace with inflation.
Right.
But a C1 or C2 professional averages a massive 20% annual salary increase. To contextualize that with the specific figures cited in the study, an employee starting with a base salary of $10,200 at an A1 level might see that grow to roughly $13,100 after 5 years.
Modest growth.
But a C1 learner starting at that exact same baseline of $10,200 sees their salary soar to over $25,300 in 5 years. The linguistic proficiency literally doubles their earning potential.
It is a staggering premium. But beyond the raw financial data, the qualitative correlations established in the study are incredibly compelling.
What did the interviews reveal?
The researchers found that C1 proficiency is directly linked to substantially higher overall job satisfaction, scoring an 8.2 out of 10 on average. Furthermore, it correlates strongly with the manifestation of highly effective leadership behaviors.
The qualitative interviews explicitly linked high communication skills to a leader's ability to articulate a clear organizational vision, practice active listening, resolve complex interpersonal conflicts, and foster cohesive teamwork among diverse individuals.
It's all connected.
In sectors like international business, technology, and finance, this level of strategic communication provides a massive competitive advantage. It enables high negotiation success and profound stakeholder influence. But here's the question we need to answer. Why?
Why the massive premium?
Yes. It's not as if a corporate HR department simply looks at a resume, sees a Cambridge C1 certificate, and arbitrarily decides to double the candidate's salary. What is the underlying mechanism driving this immense value?
That is the crux of the entire discussion. Corporations do not pay a premium for the physical piece of paper. They pay an astronomical premium for the indispensable byproducts of C1 proficiency.
The byproducts being the cognitive flexibility, the cultural fluency, and the pragmatic competence we spent the last 50 minutes dissecting.
Exactly. In a corporate environment, those linguistic traits translate directly into vital professional traits. Cognitive flexibility becomes emotional intelligence and problem-solving agility.
I see.
Cultural fluency becomes cultural intelligence, the ability to navigate diverse teams. Pragmatic competence becomes organizational intelligence, knowing how to maneuver through corporate politics and complex negotiations. In our modern, relentlessly globalized workplaces, the ability to act as a seamless linguistic and cultural bridge makes an employee unequivocally indispensable.
It reminds me of the role of high-grade synthetic oil in a highly complex multi-million-dollar engine.
Okay, run with that.
A multinational corporation is composed of myriad moving parts, right? Diverse international teams, cross-border stakeholders, global supply chains, distinct corporate cultures. If you do not have highly proficient communicators acting as the lubricant between those parts, they grind against one another.
Yes.
You get misinterpretation, cultural friction, interpersonal rivalry, and ultimately catastrophic unproductiveness. The engine overheats and fails. But a C1 employee reduces that friction. They facilitate the smooth transfer of ideas. They don't just transmit raw data. They breed innovation by ensuring everyone is actually understanding each other.
The researchers themselves, Wen and Cao, note precisely this dynamic. They state that a lack of communication causes misinterpretation and unproductiveness, whereas communication efficiency leads directly to cooperation and invention. A C1 professional possesses the mental bandwidth to anticipate misunderstandings before they even occur. They can read the room, identify a cultural disconnect, and adapt their messaging instantaneously to suit diverse audiences, keeping the engine running smoothly.
But I want to introduce a significant caveat here, and I'm drawing on a sharp observation made in our My Linguistics source.
Let's hear it.
The Wen and Cao study correlates high language proficiency with all these incredible career outcomes. But how is that proficiency actually measured by the employer? Because My Linguistics rightly points out that standardized exams like IELTS, TOEFL, or the Cambridge exams often average out a candidate's scores across 4 distinct domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking.
This is a critical vulnerability in how we assess language in the corporate world.
Because it is entirely plausible, common even, that an individual could perform exceptionally well on the reading and listening components, Perhaps they are brilliant at analyzing texts in isolation and decoding audio files in a quiet exam room.
But they might perform quite poorly on the spontaneous spoken interaction component.
Exactly. Yet, because the scores are mathematically averaged, they are awarded a shiny certificate that says C1 overall. So, does that piece of paper actually guarantee that they possess the dynamic, real-world communication skills required to lead a multicultural team or de-escalate a conflict in a live boardroom?
You have hit upon a fundamental flaw in the commodification of language assessment. The MyLinguistics source explicitly shares your skepticism, noting that examining bodies operate with varying standards and averaging methods.
It's not a perfect system.
Not at all. In some testing formats, the threshold for a C1 grade might practically reflect what is functionally just a very strong B2 level in active spoken production.
Which means the certificate is, to some extent, an unreliable narrator of the person's actual capabilities.
It absolutely can be. And this proves that the staggering career dividends highlighted in the Wen and Cow study are not generated by the formal certification itself. The salary doubling doesn't happen because of the certificate.
It happens because of the reality behind the certificate.
Yes. It happens because of actual, demonstrated communication competence in the wild. The ability to navigate chaotic multilingual environments, the capacity to code switch seamlessly between formal boardroom rhetoric and casual team-building banter at a pub, the emotional intelligence to read a tense room and soften a disagreement with diplomatic hedging.
Those are the actual skills that yield a 40% promotion rate.
Exactly. A C1 certificate might be the key that secures the initial job interview, but only authentic, demonstrated pragmatic competence will secure the corner office.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, listening to us right now? Let's synthesize this incredible, multifaceted journey. We started this conversation looking at a blank canvas.
We did.
We established that breaching the C1 threshold is not merely an exercise in accumulating a larger vocabulary bank. It is a profound, fundamental paradigm shift from transactional learning to immersive subconscious living.
It requires a literal rewiring of the cognitive engine. The grueling process of managing complex linguistic systems fosters metalinguistic awareness and a robust cognitive flexibility that transcends language, enhancing general problem-solving and executive function.
It requires abandoning the safety and structure of textbooks. Learners must fuel that newly upgraded engine with the chaotic, culturally rich complexity of authentic materials, learning to translate not just isolated words, but the subtle, unstated nuances of human context.
It demands the acquisition of a highly sophisticated toolkit. The pragmatic competence to hedge, to adapt registers fluidly, and to decode the figurative language and metaphors that serve as the foundation of advanced human discourse.
And finally, we saw the undeniable hard return on investment of this monumental endeavor. Reaching this pinnacle doesn't just make you a slightly better speaker, it transforms you into a vital cultural bridge. It makes you an indispensable asset in the global marketplace, yielding exponential dividends in career mobility, financial growth, and leadership impact.
It is an incredibly demanding undertaking, requiring years of sustained effort, but the rewards, both cognitive and professional, are truly unparalleled.
And to you, the learner, listening to this deep dive right now, I want to remind you of something crucial. By actively engaging with this dense, complex, hour-long conversation, by following our pacing, deciphering our analogies, and processing this sophisticated C1 level English, well, you are not just learning about the C1 threshold, you are actively practicing the very skills required to thrive within it. You are doing the neurological heavy lifting right now.
You're exercising that cognitive flexibility and building those synaptic connections in real time.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to ponder, drawing on a subtle tension we uncovered early in our sources today. We discussed how the highest echelons of the CEFR framework expect a user to understand virtually all forms of complex text and nuanced interaction. Yet we also established that even highly educated native speakers regularly fail to comprehend specialized texts outside of their own specific domains. The history major, staring blankly at the quantum physics journal.
The persistent myth of absolute perfection.
Exactly. So if even native speakers, the supposed gold standard of the language, fall short of total universal comprehension, does true language mastery actually exist? Is there ever a final destination where you can put down your brush and say, the painting is completely finished, there is nothing left to learn? Or is reaching the C1 level simply the beautiful, humbling realization that language is not a destination you arrive at, but rather an infinite, ever-shifting landscape that you simply agree to explore for the rest of your life. You trade the paint-by-numbers kit not for a finished masterpiece, but for the thrill of the blank canvas, something to mull over as you continue your journey. Thank you for diving deep with us today. Keep exploring that canvas.